Guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to continue with the part 2 of chapter 2 of Hornbill class 11. And we had discussed about the situations that were going on with the author and his family when they were on board, and what all happened after the wave that struck their ship. So now we're going to continue with what all things happened after he secured the holes, the where like the gaps which were there, like when he secured, what he did after that. So now let's continue. So more problems arose when our hand pump started to block up with the debris floating around the cabins, and the electric pump short circuited. The water level rose threateningly. Back on deck, I found that our two spare hand pumps had been wrenched overboard, along with the forestay sail, the jib, the dinghies, and the main anchor. So basically, what happened was, like, after he covered up the gaps which were there in the boat, the ship. So he realized that there were more problems which arose when his the hand pumps, they started to block up with the debris floating. So debris is nothing, the waste which was there, it started floating around the cabins, because of which the hand pumps, they blocked up. And the electric pump, what happened to that was this short circuited. The water level, it rose very threateningly. The water level was very high, and back on deck he found that the two spare hand pumps which they had, they wrenched overboard. That means that they, like, the when the storm it hit them, the wave that hit them, after that what happened was that their hand pumps, the other two spare hand pumps which they had dropped in the waters overboard, right? So along with the forestay sail, the jib, the dinghies, and the main anchor, so all of these things, they wrenched overboard. Then I remembered we had another electric pump under the chart room floor. I connected it to an out pipe and was thankful to find that it worked. So what happened was, like, after all this, like, they had explained what all happened. So the author, he remembered that he had another electric pump which was under the chart room floor. So what he did was he connected it to an out pipe, and he was thankful to find that it actually worked. So it would have been helpful for them to throw out the water which was coming inside their ship. The night dragged on with an endless, bitterly cold routine of pumping, steering, and working the radio. We were getting no replies to our mayday calls, which was not surprising in this remote corner of the world. So at the night, what they did was, like, they kept on dragging on with the endless, bitterly cold routine, where they had to keep on pumping, steering, and they had to try that the radio did work. And, like, they kept on giving mayday calls, but they did not get any reply, because, and it was not surprising for them, because they were in such a remote corner of the world that it was not that easy that the make mayday calls could be replied. So now let's continue. So Sue's head had swollen alarmingly. She had two enormous black eyes, and now she showed us a deep cut on her arm. When I asked why she hadn't made more of her injuries before this, she replied, "I didn't want to worry you when you were trying to save us all." So what now the author noticed was that Sue's head, it had swollen so much, and it was so alarming that she had two enormous black eyes, and then she showed a deep cut which was there on her arm. And when her dad, who, like, the author, he asked why Sue did not tell him more about his injuries before, she told that she did not want her father to worry, because he was trying to save them all. So she did not want to worry him about the injuries she had gotten. So by morning of January 3, the pumps had water levels sufficiently under control for us to take 2 hours rest in rotation, but we still had a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line. And on checking, I found that nearly all the boat's main rib frames were smashed down to the keel. In fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard hull, except a few cupboard partitions. So now they are explaining the scene that happened on January 3, and the author tells that the pumps, they had the water level, in under control for them, which helped them take 2 hours of rest in rotation. Like all of the crew people, they could take 2 hours of rest while in rotations, that one person goes for rest for 2 hours, then the other one goes for rest for 2 hours. So it was in a rotation, but it was but there was still a tremendous leak somewhere below the water line. And when the author checked, he found that nearly the boat's main rib frames, they had smashed down to the keel. And in fact, there was nothing holding up a whole section of the starboard, means one part of the boat, the half part of the boat, there was nothing holding it except a few cupboard partitions which were there. We had survived for 15 hours since the wave hit, but Wave Walker couldn't hold together long enough for us to reach Australia. I checked our charts and calculated that there were two small islands a few hundred kilometers to the east. One of them, Isle Amsterdam, was a French scientific base. Our only hope was to reach these pinpricks in the vast ocean, but unless the wind and seas abated so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. The great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action. So what happened was, the author is telling us that they had survived 15 hours since the wave which was there, which created all this chaos, which created this disaster. It was 15 hours after the wave hit them, but the wave walker, it couldn't hold together so long that they could reach Australia. And he checked his charts and he calculated that there were two small islands which were a few kilometers to the east, one of which was Isle Amsterdam, which was a French scientific base, and their only hope was to reach these pinpricks in the vast ocean. What this expression means is like the ocean, it's so vast, it's so big, and these islands, they were small islands, so they were like pinpricks in the vast ocean. But unless the wind and seas abated, so we could hoist sail, our chances would be slim indeed. So the chances of them reaching the island, he thinks that they are very slim. So the great wave had put our auxiliary engine out of action. So the wave that had hit them, it had put their auxiliary engine out of action. The auxiliary engine, it did not work properly. On January 4, after 36 hours of continuous pumping, we reached the last few centimeters of water. Now we had only to keep pace with the water still coming in. We could not set any sail on the main mast. Pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So we hoisted the storm jib and headed for where I thought the two islands were. Mary found some corned beef and cracker biscuits, and we ate our first meal in almost 2 days. So now the situation on January 4 is being explained here, and it was like the after 36 hours of continuous pumping of water, they had reached the last few centimeters of water which was left inside the ship. And now what they had was like they only had to keep pace with the water still coming in. Like the pump should be able to keep on throwing out the water which was still coming in. They could not set any sail on the main mast. The pressure on the rigging would simply pull the damaged section of the hull apart. So what would happen if they would have put more pressure on the mast? It would just hull apart the damaged section of the ship. So what they did was they hoisted the storm jib and they headed for where they thought the two islands were. They hoisted the storm jib, the flag part which is there on the top of the ship, and they started heading towards where they thought the two islands were. And what happened was, like, Mary, she found some corned beef and cracker biscuits which they ate as their first meal in almost 2 days. They had eaten nothing for the past 2 days, and when Mary found the corned beef and the cracker biscuits, they ate their first meal in almost 2 days. But our respite was short lived. At 4 p.m., black clouds began building up behind us. Within the hour, The wind was back to 40 knots and the seas were getting higher. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the night, and by dawn on January 5, our situation was again desperate. So, like the relaxation they got, it was short lived. At 4 p.m., black clouds started building up behind them. Within the hour, within 1 hour, the winds they were back to 40 knots, which is a very high speed, and the seas they were getting higher because of the waves which were coming towards them. The weather it continued to deteriorate, it continued to worsen throughout the night, and by the dawn on January 5 the situation was again desperate. They were again desperate to save themselves. When I went in to comfort the children, John asked, "Daddy, are we going to die?" I tried to assure him that we could make it. "But, Daddy," he went on, we, we aren't afraid of dying if we can all be together. You and Mummy, Sue and I. So what happened was, like, the author he went to comfort the children when his son John asked. John is it's the nickname of the son, like his actual name was Jonathan, and he asked his father whether they were going to die, and the author he tried to assure him that they will make it to the, they'll make it safe to the island. But John, he said that they were not afraid to die if the whole family was together, where it was his dad, his mommy, and his sister, and he himself. I could find no words with which to respond, but I left the children's cabin, determined to fight the sea with everything I had. To protect the weakened starboard side, I decided to heave to with the undamaged boat hull facing the oncoming waves, using the improvised sea anchor of heavy nylon rope and two 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin. What what happened to the author, that he could not find words with which he could respond, because his son he said something that was so thoughtful and deep. But what he did was he left the children's cabin, determined that he had to fight the sea and he had to save everything he had, and he had to give everything he had so that he could save everyone on board. So to protect the weakened starboard side, the half part of the ship which was already damaged, to protect that side, what he did was he used heavy nylon rope and two 22-liter plastic barrels of paraffin as as an improvised sea anchor, like an anchor. It was not actually an anchor, but he tried making an anchor out of it. So what he did was he hung that part towards the starboard side, which turned it turned the ship, and this side which was not damaged, it was towards the wave, and it was able to fight through the storms which were upcoming without damaging the part which was already damaged. Or else if it would have damaged, if the starboard side would have damaged much more, then their ship it would have definitely sunk in the waters. That evening Mary and I sat together holding hands as the motion of the ship brought more and more water in through the broken planks. We both felt the end was very near. So basically that evening Mary, his wife, and he sat together holding each other's hand as the motion of the ship, like when the ship was moving, it kept on bringing more and more water on board through the broken planks. And Mary and the author, they felt that the end was very near. But Wave Walker rode out of the storm, and by the morning of January 6th, with the wind easing, I tried to get a reading on the sextant back in the chart room. I worked on wind speeds, change of course, drift and current in an effort to calculate our position. The best I could determine was that we were somewhere in 150,000 kilometers of ocean, looking for a 65-kilometer wide island. So basically what happened was, like, the Wave Walker, it rode out of the storm, and by the morning of January 6th, the wind started easing and he tried to get a reading on the sextant, which is a device which is used. And back in the chart room, he tried to calculate and he worked on the wind speeds, changes of course, drift, and current in an effort to calculate their position. And the best he could determine was that they were somewhere 150,000 kilometers of ocean, where they were looking for a 65-kilometer wide island, which was Isle Amsterdam. While I was thinking, Sue moving painfully, joined me. The left side of her head was now very swollen, and a blackened eye narrowed to slits. She gave me a card she had made. So while he was thinking, so she came moving very painfully. She joined him, and the left side of her head, it was, very swollen, and her blackened eye, it had narrowed to slits, because like the eyes, they had narrowed so much. And she gave her dad a card that she had made. On the front, she had drawn caricatures. Caricatures are like a drawing, but it's a funny kind of a drawing which is there. It is like a cartoonish drawing which was made of Mary and me with the words, "Here are some funny people. Did they make you laugh?" I laughed a lot as well. Inside was a message: "Oh, how I love you both. So this card is to say thank you and let's hope for the best." Somehow we had to make it. So this was the stuff that was written in the card made by Sue for her mother and father. I checked and rechecked my calculations. We had lost our main compass, and I was using a spare which had not been corrected for magnetic variation. I had an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of the westerly currents which flow through this part of the Indian Ocean. So the author, he kept on checking and rechecking his calculations, and he's telling us that he had lost his main compass which was there, but he was using a spare compass. But the compass, it was not useful for magnetic variations, and he had to make an allowance for this and another estimate of the influence of the westerly currents which flow through this part of the Indian Ocean. So he was, trying to understand about their locations. He kept on checking and rechecking his calculations as to he wanted to get them, his family and his crewmen, to a safe part, which was the island Isle Amsterdam, which was the closest part. About 2 p.m., I went on deck and asked Larry to steer a course of 185 degrees. If he were lucky, I told him with a conviction I did not feel, he could expect to see the island at about 5 p.m. So at about 2 p.m., the author, he went on deck and he asked Larry Vigil to, change the course of the wheel towards 185 degrees. And he told that if they would have been lucky, they'll find the island, and they can expect to see the island at about 5 p.m. Then with a heavy heart, I went below, climbed on my bunk, and amazingly dozed off. When I woke, it was 6 p.m. and growing dark. I knew we must have missed the island, and with the sail we had left, we couldn't hope to beat back into the westerly winds. And so what happened was, like, then he had a very heavy heart because he thought that they won't be able to reach the island. He went below, he climbed on his bunk, and he amazingly dozed off. He slept, and when he woke up, it was already 6 p.m. and it was growing dark. And he knew that what he assumed was that they must have missed the island and the sail they had left, and they could not hope to reach the westerly winds. At that moment, a tousled head appeared by my bunk. "Can I have a hug?" Jonathan asked. Sue was right behind him. So it is like the conversation which is gonna happen between the dad and the kids. "Why am I getting a hug now?" I asked. "Because you are the best daddy in the whole world, and the best captain," my son replied. "Not today, John. I'm afraid." "Why, you must be," said Sue in a matter-of-fact voice. "You found the island." "What?" I shouted. "It's out there in front of us," they chorused, "as big as a battleship." So now this is the conversation between the kids and the author. So the writer, and it says, like, the kids, they went to him his son, he asked his dad for a hug. And when his dad asked like why he's getting a hug, he told, the son told him that he's the best dad and the best captain. But the author, he said that not today, John, because he was afraid that they did not reach the island. He assumed that they did not reach the island. And Sue, she said that he must be happy and he must be proud because he was able to find the island. And he exclaimed and he was shocked, and he asked what, in an surprised manner. And both the kids, like Sue and John, they chorused that it was as big as a battleship and it was in front of them. I rushed on deck and gazed with relief at the stark outline of Isle Amsterdam. It was only a bleak piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, the most beautiful island in the world. So what happened was, like, he rushed onto the deck and he gazed with a relief that he saw that island was there in front of him. The Isle Amsterdam island was there in front of him. So it was only a bleak piece. It was a small piece of volcanic rock with little vegetation, and it was the most beautiful island in the world. Because why he thought that it was the most beautiful island? Because they were able to reach on land after such a disaster they had to face. We anchored offshore for the night, and the next morning all 28 inhabitants of the island cheered as they helped us ashore. What they did was they anchored offshore for the night, like they went onto the island for the night, and the next morning the 28 inhabitants which were there on the island, they cheered as they helped them ashore. We With land under my feet again, my thoughts were full of Larry and Herbie, cheerful and optimistic under the in the distressed stress, and of Mary, who stayed at the wheel for all those crucial hours. Most of all, I thought of a 7-year-old girl who did not want us to worry about a head injury, which subsequently took 6 minor operations to remove a recurring blood clot between skin and skull, and of a 6-year-old boy who was not afraid to die. And when the author, he could feel the land under his feet again, his thoughts were full of Larry and Herbie, the two crewmen, that they were always cheerful and optimistic throughout their journey. And even though they were under so much stress and pressure. And then Mary, who stayed at the wheel during those crucial hours where it was much needed. Otherwise, if there, like, Mary would have not been there on the wheel, at the wheel, and if the author, he would have not made repairs to the ship, they would have sunken under. And most of all, he thought of a 7-year-old girl, Sue, who was his daughter, who did not want her parents to worry about a head injury. It took 6 minor operations to remove the blood clot. It was a recurring blood clot between the skin and the skull. And he thought of a 7-year-old boy, a 6-year-old boy, who was not afraid to die. So they, like, it all of them, they had a very crucial role in helping the author uh, you know get back and get safely onto a place where they could get onto land after such a long journey. So basically this was the whole chapter, and we are through with this chapter. So okay guys, we are done with this chapter, and okay, take care and bye bye.